Well, hey everybody. I hope you're having a good night. So this is kind of an impromptu video, an impromptu live stream I decided to do. Um, I've been doing a lot of research, as some of you may know, about team organization. I've been working on this thing called task force driven development. It started off being called extreme agile, but I think that task force driven development is kind of a bit more of an accurate term. So today, I just kind of wanted to go over one of the articles that I felt really compelling in talking about this idea of diversity in the workplace, um, and it sparked a lot of there's some controversy here that I think might be underlying the surface, and I want to tread carefully here on what I say. And I understand my the fact that I am a white male means that you may have some preconceived notions about how I view things, and I think that we all need to be respectful about the backgrounds that we all come from. And I think that this whole idea of diversity is both good and bad, because I think there are some great things that diversity can give us, and then there are some things that kind of come along with some of the dogma you might hear about diversity that can lead us in the wrong direction on things and actually be more destructive than helpful. And I think this article in particular really helps to emphasize some of those key points and hopefully can help guide us as a society on what it truly means to have a diverse workforce. So, with that starting, or with that little intro, let me go ahead and do the nice little intro video. All right, so today's topic again is diversity in the workplace. And I thought that this article, and then I'm going to bring in some scientific study also that I use for a lot of my research as kind of a starting point for a lot of the research I do on team performance metrics and things like that, and how do you build good, solid teams. This is where I'm getting some of this information from, is kind of my starting point, because there's a lot of articles and studies that are referenced by that. But I thought I'd start off first with this Harvard Business Review, because I think this really packs a punch when it comes to diversity in the workplace. First of all, I do want to say from the start, I am a proponent of diversity in the workplace. I think it is crucial to a properly functioning organization, as well as down at the microcosm level of a team. You need diversity on the team. The real question is, what do you mean by diversity? What is that Steve really means by diversity? Well, I think that this term diversity is something that and inclusion. I think inclusion is a different component. I think inclusion is more or less about making sure you are not excluding specific groups based upon biases, right? That's really what we are really trying to get to. And the whole idea of diversity also is about not having a bias that excludes any particular individual. So if you're coming here thinking that what Steve's going to talk about is all the ways that we need to be exclusionary about certain groups, I've got news for you. That's not where I come from. Regardless of any conceptions you might have had about me or who I am or political leanings, that is not the case. I believe wholeheartedly in diversity in the workplace. But again, we need to talk more specifically about what that means. What kind of diversity should we have? So this Harvard Business Review article is a really good one. This was put together by Allison Reynolds and David Lewis back in 2017. I've used this article several times when I kind of go back. It's like a little touchstone for me, something to go back and reread once in a while. And I found it a very effective article on describing what I think to be a pretty well-known truth, right? I think we know these things. We know it is this way. And this is just kind of putting it all out there with backed up data and study. So let's start off with, I'll go ahead and read through most of the article here, but I'm going to emphasize some of the highlighted parts. Looking at the executive teams we work with as consultants and those we teach in the classroom, increased diversity of gender, ethnicity, and age is apparent. Over recent decades, the rightful endeavor to achieve a more representative workforce has had an impact. Of course, there is a ways to go, but progress has been made. I do agree with this. I do believe progress has been made. I do think that these ideas, again, I think this is more about the inclusion part of things. We say diversity, but I think this is more about avoiding exclusion. And I think we all in here, maybe not all of us, but several, the majority, the overwhelming majority of Americans, and I think individuals that at least I've worked with and are in the computer and electronics industry do believe that an exclusion of somebody based upon these characteristics, right? These innate, immutable characteristics such as their age, their ethnicity, their gender, right? Those things are, you shouldn't be excluding anybody based upon those biases, okay? Even if, and I'm going to go so far as to say, even if you have a bias, it should not be exclusionary. It should not cause you to exclude. And that's kind of an interesting little entanglement there of wordplay that you may find interesting. But I think we all have biases. I think we all have them to some extent. It's just a matter of whether or not we let those biases control our decisions. And there are certain degrees that I think we all allow for our biases to take control of our decision-making processes. And then there are ways that we try to avoid that. But I am getting rather verbose and off topic. So I'm going to go, in Galvanize, we call this Elmo. Enough, let's move on. So I'm calling Elmo on myself here. Let's go ahead and move on. Throughout this period, we have run a strategic execution exercise with executive groups focused on managing new, uncertain, and complex situations. The exercise requires the group to formulate and execute a strategy to achieve a specified outcome against the clock. So this is just kind of stating what the kind of a summary of the experiments and exercise and study that they were doing. So just kind of telling you their methodology. Received wisdom is that the more the diverse teams in terms of age, ethnicity, and gender, the more creative and productive they are likely to be. So this is the key point. The general wisdom, right? The received wisdom, the wisdom that is out there that you will hear in many, many organizations is that the more diverse the teams are in terms of age, ethnicity, and gender, the more creative and productive they are likely to be. Now, I think that is such a common belief in the enterprise that it's almost an innate part of an organization now. It's kind of in the HR guidebook and the employee handbook in many of these cultures. It's so ubiquitous in the industry as well that, if we just get more people of different diversities of age and more ethnicity and more cultural backgrounds and genders, then that's going to lead us to success by having more creativity and productivity. The results from their study state this, though. But having run the execution exercise around the world more than 100 times over the last 12 years, we have found no correlation between this type of diversity and performance. I'm just going to let that statement kind of stand on its own. I want you to think really good, long, and hard about that. I'm going to ask you a question. Before you knew that you were going to be watching this live stream, do you think you already knew that? Did you need this study to tell you that? Did you not know this before you heard this study, before you heard this little summarization of their study? I want you to think about that and think about the way in which you did or didn't come to that conclusion already before you watched this live stream. What are the pressures? What is the culture that you live in that made it so that you either did or did not already know that? Okay. With an average group size of 16 comprising senior executives, MBA students, general managers, scientists, teachers, and teenagers, our observations have been consistent. So again, they're talking about the different diversity of group sizes, the group size of 16, the levels of, I guess, achievement that they have received, and age. They don't mention anything about gender or anything like that, but yeah, they're talking about a lot of different diverse backgrounds here, right? Some groups have fared exceptionally well and others incredibly badly, irrespective of diversity in gender, ethnicity, and age. So this study kind of flies directly in the face of the received wisdom, the conventional wisdom. Since there is so much focus on the importance of diversity in problem solving, we were intrigued by these results, as I think anybody would be. And I think that there's a political component to this. I don't know that that can be understated. I think the politics of this particular discussion has led science and discovery to lead to conclusions that are just confirmation bias rather than studying the actual outcomes and studying the data to determine your conclusion statements. You may walk in with a hypothesis, and I think that that's exactly what we have here. Is we have the hypothesis that the more the diverse teams are in terms of age, ethnicity, and gender, that hypothesis is that diversity automatically leads to more effective and productive and creative groups. But the question is, does that what the data actually leads us to? Does that what the science leads us to? All right. Since, if not diversity, what accounted for such variability in performance? We wanted to understand what led some groups to succeed and others to crash and burn. This led us to consider differences that go beyond a gender, ethnicity, or age. Right, so it goes beyond those things. It goes beyond those innate characteristics, right? Those immutable characteristics. We began to look more closely at cognitive diversity. Now, I want to stop here just for a moment, and I want to tell you why I think that these two ideas are not mutually exclusive either. I think that the diversity in terms of age, ethnicity, cultural background, those sorts of things, gender, they do lead you through different experiences, right? We all have these identities that are based upon these immutable characteristics that help kind of categorize or group us together. And those things, I don't think that it can be that those things should be ignored. I think that they all lead us to certain cognitive abilities, right? And that doesn't mean one. You may even argue, and I'm not going to disargue this. I'm not going to say that this is wrong. And I think what a lot of current theory out there is that based upon those immutable characteristics, you might have a higher probability of certain types of cognitive abilities. Now that's entirely possible, right? And I think that just to bring it to distill it down to like a very simple comparison, if you take some kid that's some black kid that is coming up from Compton or something and put him in the public school system, their ability to have their cognitive abilities, they have enormous potential. There is a ton of potential, but the environmental factors based upon their ethnicity and background and age and all that good stuff certainly can play a part in their ability to develop cognitive reasoning. And that's not a statement of them and their value, right? I'm not claiming anything about that person's particular value. They're very valuable. They're highly valuable. Every individual on this planet is valuable to me. But that doesn't mean that the environment doesn't play a part in the development of individuals. And you could even identify based upon metrics. You could identify with statistics certain groups that have higher or larger challenges than others. And I don't think that that should be a controversial position. I think that's just a simple statement of fact. Some groups have it a little bit better than others. And it's a very unfortunate situation. And I don't know that some of the solutions that are out there are the correct ones. I don't believe that what you do is burn down the entire house because there's a subgroup of a subgroup of a subgroup that is having difficulty. Now, that subgroup can be very large too, right? You could have a large portion of society that is incredibly poorly off. But that doesn't mean you burn down the whole system. You find ways to make incremental improvements so that you develop some sort of equity. So, okay, we're getting down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I think you need to understand the underlying context that I think a lot of this data that we have kind of permeates through a lot of these cultural differences. We tend to mix cultural identities with cognitive abilities when that shouldn't be the case. We should avoid those type of direct it's correlation, it's not causation. Okay? Well, there's something to be said, and maybe we can do something to improve the environments of those we identify as having more difficult time, going about their lives. We should definitely do everything we can to strive to do better. Absolutely. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you do away with the entire system. It doesn't mean that the entire system is therefore corrupted and should be thrown away with all the good parts and bad parts. We should work to find better ways to improve things. And it starts with data. It starts with looking at actual studies, actual science, and identifying those areas of opportunities and ways to fix them. And this article is kind of pointing us in that right direction. Let's look at what actually matters, not what we think matters based upon politics, not based upon these cultural beliefs. Let's look at what the actual data points to. And according to them, it's about the cognitive diversity. That's the success metric. How diverse is your cognitive ability? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but another way of framing cognitive diversity is interdependency of skill. Okay? How dependent are you on others with a different set of skills? And with those different set of skills, again, that does have, I believe, some cultural components to it. I think certain cultures have certain skills, and based upon their upbringing and the environment of their culture are going to lead them to have those better skills. I don't think it's any sort of secret that for whatever reason, people from the Asian countries are better at mathematics. That I don't think that we could. Now, that doesn't mean that it's because they are of a particular race or their skin color or any of those things, any of those immutable characteristics, but their culture that they have developed, and sometimes culture is based upon those immutable characteristics. We band together. But if you take somebody with my skin complexion and throw me in China as a little tiny tot, and raise me up in the Chinese culture, I'm going to develop a lot of those same habits that the Chinese culture exhibits. And so I would probably be a little bit, the probability of me being better at mathematics than I am right now would be higher, just simply because of the cultural pressures that particular group has. I don't think that this shouldn't be controversial. There shouldn't be any reason to believe this is controversial. It's because we're talking about potential and cultural factors. But the point that I'm getting at here is that culture, I believe, does play a part in cognitive diversity. And we do need to fix culture where we see there are deficiencies. It doesn't mean you disrespect past culture. You have to have respect of past culture. You look at history in order to find what can be done better and what went well, right? What went well, what didn't go well. You have to look at the historical data, and culture is a part of the historical data. So anyway, okay, Elmo, I'm calling Elmo myself again. Enough, let's move on. Cognitive diversity has been defined as differences in perspective or information processing styles. It is not predicted by factors such as gender, ethnicity, or age. And again, I think that there are some, again, there are things that I think impact the ability for certain, or I shouldn't say ability, that impact the processing styles that come from particular cultures. And some individuals may develop characteristics that other cultures may typically or historically have better ability to do, or have a higher influx of a particular type. So again, I think culturally we can find kind of this bell curve of, individuals. You're going to have a higher percentage of individuals that exhibit certain skills in processing. But that doesn't mean that it's exclusionary. It doesn't mean that you have to be in that culture in order to think that way. That's not true. You can be of just about any culture and think a particular way. You might be an outcast to that culture, but you can still think in a way that other cultures might be thinking and be an expert in that. I mean, if you, well, I don't want to get too far. Again, I'm going to call Elmo myself. We're going to keep moving on. So here we are interested in a specific aspect of cognitive diversity, how individuals think about and engage with new, uncertain, and complex situations. The AEM Cube, a tool developed by Peter Robertson. I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm going to go ahead and skip down. But basically, they're using the AEM Cube. If you want to learn more about it, by all means, you can go ahead and research this topic, AEM Cube and Peter Robertson. Okay. But I do want to get down to, having run this strategic execution exercise over 100 times and observed such big differences in the performance of teams, we decided to use the AEM Cube to measure the level of cognitive diversity in groups undertaking the exercise. So that is how they can, so that is how they are defining the cognitive, or determining the cognitive diversity of the individuals partaking in this study, in this 100-time that they exercise, right? They did this exercise 100 times. So Survivalizer, and the thing I kind of giggled, that's not the right, snickered at. He said, "It's too late for coffee. The stream is illegal." That's right, coffee with Steve, and I don't even have coffee with me. That makes this stream illegal. If I had at least coffee, that would probably make it legal, but I don't. So you're probably right. So here is the graph. We see team A, B, C, D, E, and F. As you can see, it goes down. We see performance minutes to complete the challenge. You can see team A actually performed the best in terms of time. 45 minutes for E, and so 45 minutes was a failure. 60 minutes was a failure. So E and F both failed. Knowledge processing, standard deviation. So standard deviation just basically means the difference from the average. Okay, so if you were to average out the values, and then you have this group had a deviation from that average of this amount, either higher or lower. Okay, so called the standard deviation. So knowledge processing, standard deviation 25.98. They had a high standard deviation 29. These are pretty high standards of deviation, I think, for the AEM Cube. Perspective standard deviation, and I'm not really sure what perspective deviation is. I'm not really sure. I think that is part of the AEM Cube metrics, but I don't know for sure. I'd have to go look that up. Anyway, so moving on. The three teams that completed the challenge in a good time, A, B, and C, all had diversity of both knowledge process and perspective, as indicated by a larger standard deviation. The three that took longer or failed to complete, D, E, and F, all had less diversity, as indicated by a lower standard deviation. So that's what this is the standard deviation. So this is kind of measuring the diversity of cognitive thinking. So the higher the standard deviation, remember I was talking about this as kind of the average, the more standard deviations the more variable variations away from that of that mean is how you have a larger number in standard deviation. So the more complex and variety you have in the group, the larger that standard deviation is going to be. Okay. All right. I think that's pretty much all that I had highlighted from this article. I will definitely post a link to this if you want to have a further read, but I do think the big takeaways are what I've got highlighted here in red. Having run the exclusion exercise around the world more than 100 times over the last 12 years, we have found no correlation between this type of diversity and performance. The diversity they're talking about is race, ethnicity, gender, and age. Okay, race, ethnicity, kind of same thing. That shows there's no direct tie there based upon their study. Some groups have fared exceptionally well and others incredibly badly, irrespective of diversity, gender, ethnicity, and age. So some do good, some do bad, and it doesn't seem to matter what the diversity in terms of age, ethnicity, etc. We don't none of that seems to really matter. It seems to be that it is this cognitive diversity. Okay, it is so cognitive diversity has been defined as differences in perspective or information processing styles. It is not predicted by factors such as gender, ethnicity, or age. So cognitive diversity is not predicted by gender, ethnicity, or age. It's not predicted. And I think that there are, and that kind of goes against what I've been saying, right? And so I think I'm a little bit, and I may be wrong. I don't know that I want to take this strong of a stance. I don't know that I want to believe that, honestly. I think that there are bell curves for any ethnic group in terms of cognitive diversity. I think that there are going to be some deviations. Now, I think the metric probably doesn't bear that out. I think that's where my distinction is the AEM that they're talking about, the AEM cube, that may not be a measurement by which you can find a direct link with those characteristics, with those immutable characteristics. But I think, again, it's not those characteristics so much as it is cultural. Okay, I think the culture in which you live, and again, I think that goes to, if you have the melting pot of America, and if we truly had a truly well-crafted culture that truly was colorblind, it did not look at those immutable characteristics of an individual, then I think that you would say that the culture of America would have an impact on those things. And that's where I think that there's a little bit of a context that's missing from this article, is that the immutable characteristics they're talking about, such as ethnicity, age, and gender, those things are not culture. Those do not distinguish your culture. You can have a culture around those things, but typically when we're thinking about culture, we're actually thinking about things like the country of origin or the region that you are from. So North Americans, there's kind of this symbiosis between Canadians and Americans. We have a lot of similar cultural heritage. There are definitely some differences, but I think by and large, we think and act a lot alike. There's just going to be some similarities there. But once you get into the Latin American part of the Americas, you're going to find that there are some similarities there. Same thing with, if you go way down south to the Chilean, I don't want to say Chilean and Argentinians are the same. Somebody would get on this and say, how dare you? But, there's just this, by region, you're going to have cultural differences. And sometimes it's easy to identify culture based upon immutable characteristics, but that is not a true measurement of the different, those immutable characteristics are not something that you can find as a cognitive predictor, okay? But I do think that there is probably something there about culture as a predictive. And again, I think that's going to be a bell curve. You take one particular individual, they may think a little bit outside of their cultural society, and think more alike. So if I was to find, I know people that are very, they think a lot like the Chinese. Okay, they love the Chinese culture. They believe in the communist theory. They follow the cultural aspects of China to a large extent because they have a lot of they revere the Chinese culture, and because of that, they may be from another country. They may be from, and again, doesn't matter about age, gender, skin color, doesn't matter about any of those things. If they think in the same way that the Chinese culture does, then they're going to have certain cognitive I don't know what you would call it, cognitive categorization that kind of maybe might lump them a little bit more in the Chinese culture, and that might put them in the same type of cognitive skill diversity areas. So, it's hard to say. It's, again, not, I don't think that it's going to be based upon those immutable characteristics, but I think cultural leanings could certainly play a part in the different type of skill sets that you have when it comes to mental activities. Okay. I think science kind of bears that out. And I would like to find some more information on that because I think that there's a link there, and that's probably where I'm going to do some more studying. Because again, that's kind of my hypothesis, and I don't have anything to support it just yet. So I'm going to go look at the studies to actually see if I'm right about the cultural linkage to cognitive skill sets. Okay, I did want to get into this article as well, and I'm just going to briefly kind of go over just the highlights here, because there's a particular word I was saying. Cognitive diversity. This is kind of the idea. And another way of saying cognitive diversity is interdependency, interdependent skills. Okay, so having a skill set, having different people, having a diverse set of people with a variety of different skills that have some interweaving that has to be done in order to problem solve. That is where I think that you will find there is more success, right? So it's not just the fact of having the diversity, the cognitive diversity of the composition, but also the fact that the mere fact that you have that breakage, the diversity of those cognitive processes, it's also talking about how the interdependency, the way that the team has to work and have a task that requires the interdependency of that cognitive diversity, right? Those different skills, you have to force a situation where you have to have those different ways of thinking that bring them together, okay? So it's kind of two sides of the same coin. You need a team that is diverse, but then you also need to give them a task that forces them to work together and rely upon each other. And that is where you get optimized output. You get optimized performance. So back here in this article, and I'm just going to show you overview of research on team effectiveness. This was an overview, and it was conducted by where'd it go? I had it before. Based on a review of literature, Marks, Matthew, and Zakaro, Kozlowski, and Ilgen, which was they have a lot of contributions to this article. Solis, Goodwin, and Burke in 2009. The committee defines team effectiveness as follows. Team effectiveness, also referred to as team performance, is a team's capacity to achieve its goals and objectives. This capacity to achieve goals and objectives leads to improved outcomes for the team members. Ergo, team member satisfaction and willingness to remain together, as well as outcomes produced or influenced by the team. In a science team or larger group, the outcomes include new research findings or methods and may also include transitional applications of the research. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to go to interdependence. I just tried to find a few different places where they mention interdependence in here. Cognitive team interaction, team mental models, and transactive memory focus on cognitive structure or knowledge and how that knowledge is shared or distributed among team members. Although knowledge certainly contributes to team cognition, it is not equivalent to team-level cognitive processing. Teams often effectively or actively engage in cognitive processes such as decision-making, problem-solving, situation assessment, planning, and knowledge sharing. All right, here's the good part. The interdependence of team members necessitates cognitive interaction or coordination, often manifested through communication, the essential building block of team cognition. So again, this is talking about how the interdependence of team members necessitates cognitive interaction. So we've got cognitive diversity, but then also we have to have interdependency in order to that is the essential building block of team cognition. Okay. All right, scroll down a little bit further. Science teams in larger groups, like teams in general, are interdependent and require interaction to build new knowledge. So how do you build knowledge? You interact with a cognitively diverse group that have interdependencies. I think this is, again, these are probably statements that are you already knew, and maybe this stream is completely boring to you, but no one's actually showed you that there is scientific study that backs all of this up. This is not just simply intuitive knowledge. There is actual study that proves the thing that you probably, hopefully, you already knew at some level. And if you didn't, that's okay. It's certainly okay to not know something. But if you didn't know this, again, I think it's a worthwhile exercise to think carefully about how did you come to this conclusion? How did you not already know this? What type of pressures and cultural environment are you living in that basically said that this was the opposite? Okay. A little bit more down here. So there have been multiple meta-analyses. I don't know how to say it. Analyses? Okay. There have been multiple meta-analyses of team cohesion. This is one of my favorite words to talk about is cohesion because it is often misunderstood. With two of the more recent ones, Gully, Devine, and Whitney, 1995, and Beal, etc. al. I don't know what et al. I think et al. Means, and others, in 2003, being the most thorough and rigorous. Both papers concluded that team cohesion is positively related to team effectiveness, and that the relationship is moderated by task interdependence, such that the cohesion effectiveness relationship is stronger when team members are more interdependent. And that's kind of the final statement on that particular thing is, and what I've been pointing at, what I've been telling you the conclusion is that team members or effectiveness is really about team members that have interdependencies, right? We have to learn to work together, okay? Because if we don't, we can't achieve our goal, right? If we all have different skills, and we've seen this on anything from basketball, sports is a great place to look for it, right? We have all of these different positions within, if you're a soccer, if you're in the European Union or something, or some other, where other than America, you call soccer football. You have different positions. You have centers, forwards, goalies, etc. You have to have those different positions. They all have their own particular skill sets to manage the game in some way, in some area, in some facet. And it requires the entire team to work together cooperatively and work using their particular skill set in an interdependent way in order to achieve success. In basketball, it's the same. I mean, I'm a really short guy. I couldn't possibly stand underneath the hoop and block Shaquille O'Neal. There's no freaking way, right? There's a certain skill set that I clearly don't have, not just in terms of physical ability, but I'm not an NBA player. I would not be able to do that. And you wouldn't really want to put your star point guard against the center. There are two different skill sets. You wouldn't want to just suddenly make the point guard the center. That's not exactly, there are some very talented basketball players that can make that kind of swap. Usually you make them like a power forward and a point guard and swap out those roles. But you really require a team of 5 individuals with a variety of different skill sets. You need a threat out at the 3-point line. You need somebody who's gonna be able to threaten going down the middle. You need somebody that's going to threaten standing underneath the basket and just dunking on people all day. You need you need teams that set up plays and plans, and there's just this interdependency that is required, and you often have to pass the ball around to the different individuals, giving different looks and setting them up for the best opportunity for success. That's an obvious thing. We already know these things. We pretty much already plan for it as a matter of course when it comes to sports. So why is it that when we talk about business, it's somehow different? I don't really know. I don't know why there seems to be this belief that cognitive diversity is not the answer, and that cross-functional teams with interdependent skills is not how you should be constructing teams. And I am very much against that philosophy. We should absolutely have cross-functional teams. We absolutely need interdependency of skills, because that is what creates the most effective teams. And it also leads to the highest cohesion, because when those teams are effective, wins develop cohesion. As a team is successful, they develop cohesion. It is not the other way around, as some people think. Cohesion does not lead to success. Success leads to cohesion. It's kind of the reverse of how a lot of the industry thinks, just as a lot of the industry thinks that the received wisdom that more diverse the team is in terms of age, ethnicity, and gender, the more creative and productive they're likely to be. I think there's a difference there between those immutable characteristics and culture. I think diversity of culture is most certainly something we could inspect and investigate. But a lot of these immutable characteristics we see kind of creeping into the business world to make our determination about how we're going to succeed. I think that is a faulty premise. So there you have it. And not only do I think that, but the Harvard Business Review, who had conducted a study of over 100 teams, they also conclude the same thing. So there you go. All right. I don't have any questions on my stream. This is kind of a impromptu thing late at night on a Monday. Nobody's really around. Thanks for watching. I hope that you did learn something from this. I will definitely post the links to the different articles that I posted here so that you can research them yourself, because don't just take my word for it. If you don't believe me, you don't agree with me, or maybe you don't agree with them and their processes, their method of study, by all means, you should challenge them on that. And if you have a different perspective on this and you would like to join the conversation, please feel free to drop any related article in the comment section below this video. And, as long as it's not pointing at some place it's not supposed to be pointing, I will allow it in the comment section. So hopefully you enjoyed this.